Right now we're going to talk about it with somebody who was there on the campus of Kent State University, May 4th, 1970. It was a monumental time for him. As a matter of fact, so much so that Peter Jeddick wrote a book about his time at Kent State University called Hippies, a Kent State love story. And Peter Jeddick joins us now on AM 1420 The Answer. Hey, Pete, how are you?
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
It's good to have you, Peter. It's great to have kind of a bit of a first-hand account, if you will, of this incredible experience in the in the modern American history. You were there. Before we talk about the day, May 4th, 1970, as we look back 50 years, talk to me about the lead-up. You were on the campus. You know that it was, a fairly liberal campus back then, as much as it is now. Maybe even that's an understatement. Anti-war protesters were a popular theme on a lot of campuses, not just Kent State University. But was there an indication to you, any indication, Peter, when you were on that campus in the days and weeks leading up to what would be that fateful day, that things were getting out of control?
No, really, it wasn't really a liberal campus. It was considered a conservative campus because even a commuter campus at the time. A lot of kids, blue-collar kids from Cleveland and Akron and Youngstown would drive into Kent. And there was only a small group of really student protesters. But we all got branded as protesters. Anybody had long hair and a beard like me. I was a spectator at the time. And but the whole generation gap was going on then, and the parents were mad at us because we were against the war, and they were World War II vets. They went and did their duty, and they thought we should do our duty. But Vietnam was a different war, and the truth was coming out about Vietnam. That it wasn't really a very smart move, for foreign policy move for us. And my friends were getting killed over there from high school, and I was fortunate that I went to college and I had a 4-year deferment. But what was leading up to it was that, as you know, Nixon gave a speech on Thursday night, April 30th. And that's what set it off. He said he's going to invade Cambodia. And we elected Nixon to end the war because he said he was going to end the war. And what happened after that, it all just kind of built up. If you want me to get into detail, I can get into detail of how, every day it kind of built up to May 4th.
Yeah, well, what I really wanted to talk about again, so you're describing the campus as not being overly liberal, but it was kind of, the anti-war protesters, like you said, the long-haired Jesus freaks as they were known, looking back at the summer of 69, looking back at really all of the late 60s as the, kind of the flower child movement began to really kind of take root, and it spread to a lot of college campuses. I was a child. I was literally, 3 years old when all of this went down. So, but when you look at the, atmosphere, the political atmosphere and the cultural atmosphere of the time, the counterculture movement seemed to be on all kinds of campuses. But you're saying it wasn't particularly widespread on the Kent campus, right?
Oh, no, it wasn't. No, Kent was considered a very conservative campus, and that made the student protesters. I knew a lot of those guys, the radicals. They were mad. They said, we got to get people against this war. We got to fire them up, And that's what happened. After Nixon made that speech, a couple of them went downtown and started some problems and broke some windows. And that got the mayor scared, so he calls Governor Rhodes, and Governor Rhodes calls in the National Guard. And it starts escalating, And the Guard, those guys were the same age as us. And they were kind of scared.
Sure.
And,
Sure, yeah, I'm sure they were scared too. They don't want, that's one of the things. And you talk about National Guardsmen in particular too, but yeah, and even, the Marines and the Army and all of these people who were drafted to go to war and to go to serve actually in Vietnam, so many of them were young college age kids. So you're right. You got guardsmen being called in to try to keep the peace and to make sure that a protest doesn't get too out of control and that violence isn't done. And, you're asking a lot of young kids to make decisions that you probably don't want to ask a lot of young kids to have to make, especially when it comes to lethal force, but that's where we were. So tell me about the day. Pete, tell me where you were in relation to the the protest and where you were when everything happened and what was going through your mind as you learned of everything that was going on.
Well, what happened is they had this protest planned for Monday, May 4th at noon. Mm-hmm. The radicals had set that up, but the National Guard came in the night before because they burned down the ROTC building, which caused a lot of trouble. And the National Guard took over and said, this is our campus now. But the kids didn't get the memo, They didn't have the Internet. Nobody knew that, We thought we have a right to assemble, and the National Guard said, no, you don't. We own the campus now. You know, it's kind of weird. I went to class. I went that morning to classes, and there's a tank sitting in front of the library. You know, it was crazy. Everything leading up to it was crazy. So May 4th, I'm standing there watching the protest, and there were, you know, only a small group of really protesters, maybe 30 or 40, and then a bunch of kids jumped in to help them because they just wanted to help out. But you had a couple of thousand kids like standing around watching them, and that was the difference. You know, most of the kids that were protesters were watching, spectators, but they were considered protesters. So the National Guard drove through these protesters, and I'm watching, and it was called the Commons. It was the flat part of campus.
Right.
And said, you got to leave. You know, we got to leave. This is a legal assembly. The kid said, no, it's not. And actually, my one friend said the wind was a big factor. So they shot tear gas at the kids, but the wind was blowing it back in the face of the guards, so that got them angry. And the kids threw the tear gas back at the kids, and the National Guard looked like they were losing this protest, you know. But it should have been all over. You know, everybody thought, well, you know, we did our part, we protested, they did their part, they broke up the protest. But a small group of them went over the top of the hill, and luckily, looking back, I didn't see the exact killing because it would have marked me for life. I would have probably had post-traumatic stress syndrome or something. But a small group of them got mad, and somebody gave an order. This never came out why they actually shot the small group of guardsmen. They kind of broke off from the other ones. And they all turned and fired at the same time, 13 seconds. You don't all turn and fire within 13 seconds without planning it, you know. So I think their boss got mad. We're not putting up with these protests.
Wait. You hold on, Peter. I want to make sure I understand.
Yeah,
You think that the guardsmen went in there with plans to shoot students?
At the time on the field it happened, you know. But because they had a little skirmish earlier where they pointed their guns and they didn't fire. And I think
that's obviously that. Yeah, I mean the presence, of course, of weapons would be to deter anybody from doing anything violent. You know, if you do anything violent, you're going to get hurt. So certainly that's why you would point the guns. But when you just said they fired all of those rounds in 13 seconds, you don't do that without planning. I guess I don't quite understand what you mean. It would seem to me like it was almost.
They kind of had like a huddle, and they said, "We're going to teach these students." You know, the students weren't smart either. They're giving them the finger, and they didn't really throw a lot of rocks. That people say we're throwing rocks, but they were swearing at them and giving them the finger and stuff. And I think they just had said, "We're not taking this anymore." You know, they've been taking it all weekend, and they decided to. And the guy gave an order to fire. I think that it kind of came out that they figured out this order, but it's never been proven. You know, but so they all fired at the same time. And you know, and this real sad part is, like my one friend got killed, Sandy Schroyer. She was walking to class. She was a great girl. She wasn't protesting. She wasn't even watching the protest. She was walking to class, and she got killed. I mean, that's trying to explain that to your parents, you know, and they killed 4 kids and wounded 9, so it really got out of hand.
It was obviously shocking is too much of an understatement, you know, to see that this had happened on a college campus, but Can you try to describe the mood, not just the rest of May 4th, but did you stay on campus? Because again, I don't know the history here too much. Did they clear the campus after that? Did they send everybody home? What happened the next day on Tuesday? What happened in the next few days because of the stunning turn of events there?
Oh, it all happened the same day. Actually, the word went out fast. I mean, it was an international event. I had a girlfriend in Switzerland. She saw it on TV right when it happened. A few minutes later, it went all over the world. It was big, and the whole colleges all across the country started rioting. And it's kind of like today. They closed Kent right away. They closed colleges all across.
That's
the
what
country.
I mean. So they closed it right away, and so like was the campus ordered to be deserted? Did they send students home?
Oh yeah, that was a real cluster because everybody trying to get. I tried to call home, and here's the crazy thing. You know, they didn't have cell phones. You had to use their landline or the payphone. You had to go back to your apartment.
Sure.
The whole phone system crashed in Kent because so many people were trying to call. So you couldn't even call, but then all the parents are trying to come back. There's a million stories about, like, my dad had to go through the National Guard to pick us up, you know, and everybody had their own stories about how he got back, and some people jumped in with their friends and just to get out of town, you know.
How many days, Pete, was the campus closed?
Oh, the rest of the semester, it was done. It was just like today. There's a lot of similarities. What went on then and what went on today.
Yeah, I guess given the timing at the end of a semester, it would make sense for it to be like that. So, did you go back then in the fall?
Oh yeah.
Tell me what was different. Tell me what was different, if anything, in the fall when you returned.
Then, you know, and Kent had now had a national reputation. Before that, nobody knew where Kent was like the largest school in Ohio nobody ever heard of, you know, and it was the second largest school next to Ohio State, but nobody knew it was there. Now it has a big reputation, and it lost a lot of kids. A lot of, you know, they couldn't recruit for about 10 years. They couldn't get kids to go there because, you know, hey, I'm not sending my kid to Kent where he might get killed, you know.
Wow.
And,
but as you pointed out though, there were riots or protests that some became violent on campuses all over the country as a result of what happened, of the shootings themselves, which of course is, you know, not to speak specifically on Kent. It happened at Kent, but I mean, the fact that people rioted in support or in solidarity, if you will, or protested in solidarity with those who were shot on campuses all over the country, you know, I'm actually surprised. Are you surprised, Peter, that there weren't kind of repeats of this in other places?
Oh, yeah, that's what they thought. You know, the protests were going on before Kent, too, that same thing. It was all over the country. It was not just Kent wasn't the only one that was having it. Ohio State had worst riots that May 4th weekend after Cambodia. Nixon made a big mistake on that Cambodia thing. He set off the whole country. He set fire to the anti-war movement, which was kind of protested anyway, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course it was. I mean, even before that, when Johnson was you know, making the decisions, I mean, college campuses were filled with protesters all over the country. You know, especially a lot of places like Berkeley and some of the traditional liberal hotspots, if you will. The anti-war protests were numerous all over the country. This particular one, and I guess that's my point, because there were so many of them, and so many of them were, let's just say, less than peaceful. In many circumstances, I'm surprised there weren't more confrontations with law enforcement and or military in order to try to keep the peace and to stop things from being burned or destroyed or whatnot around the country.
Oh yeah, that's it's just weird that it happened again. It was bound to happen somewhere. Yeah. It's just real strange and real sad that it happened right here in Northeast Ohio. But here's another point that maybe your conservative viewers would like to hear that people don't talk about. You know, I think, because of Cambodia and Kent State and Nixon's mistake there, it became Nixon's war. Before that, it was really Johnson's war. You know, people don't realize that actually, this is a terrible war. That John F. Kennedy started it, and Lyndon Johnson was the one to send most of the kids over there. And my friends from high school were getting killed for nothing. It was a really, you know, a bad war. And my freshman year, when Johnson said he wasn't going to run for re-election, our whole dorm was cheering. But they hated Johnson for that.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they did.
But then after May 4th, it became Nixon's war and the Republicans' war. It changed everything.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, and I think it was the war. You know, and it really didn't matter. I don't think the party mattered, you know, to the counterculture, you know, students, the 19, 20, 21-year-olds of that day. And again, I'm looking at it from history's lens because I was a child. I didn't experience it the way you did. But looking at it, it was no matter who was in charge, if they didn't end that war or withdraw immediately, they were going to own it, and the counterculture was going to hold them accountable for it. So they did. They held Johnson accountable, and then they held Nixon accountable. There's no doubt about it. I think it kind of transcended party politics, and it was really more of you know, the peaceniks versus those who believed we needed to stop communism from spreading at all costs. And that, of course, has been argued for 50 years, the wisdom of going into Vietnam or not. And it will probably continue to be argued for another 50 after this. But today is the 50th anniversary of the terrible, tragic shooting of the students on the Kent State campus, May 4th, 1970. Peter Jeddick was there, and Pete loves recounting his times at Kent State. Again, he's got a book, Pete, right? Hippies, a Kent State love story. Where can people get that book?
Oh, it's on Amazon, or they can go to my website, hippiesbook.com. And, you know, I try to make it entertaining because people don't want to hear dry history. Most people don't want to read that. So it's about a lot of it is what I saw, and I try to make it a love story. They're trying to have a relationship while all this craziness is going on for the whole year leading up to Kent State.
Well, you know, you're right, because there's a lot of places to get just the dry, sanitized, you know, facts about what happened there, and to try to tell a story and weave a story around it is a great idea. So that's online at hippiesbook.com. Peter Jeddick is the author. Peter Jeddick was on the campus during the tragedy. Pete, thanks for recounting everything with us. We certainly appreciate it.
Okay, Bob, you keep the faith. Thank you, sir. Stay safe.
Thank you, and you as well.
Safe.
Thank you, and you as well.
Safe.